As Taris mentioned, my name is Dave Campbell. I'm an M365 consultant, and I have been for many moons. But long in the tooth now, which is a good thing, in my opinion. We're going to be talking about security today, primarily around M365 security. Let me just jump into the agenda so we can have a look. So we're going to review how security has changed over the years, especially with the adoption of cloud services. We're going to talk about M365 adoption and the challenges that brings as well. We're going to talk about the M365 security arsenal, and this includes the new Microsoft Defender umbrella. Talk about some of the solutions, maybe a demo or two about some of them to kind of implement them in a more efficient and better way. And then we're going to talk about data. So data lifecycle, knowing your data, where is your data when it comes to M365, and then talking about classifying and protecting that data in kind of methods and ways that you can do that. So just I want to cover off a few objectives for today's session. I want to review the ways that security has changed from being a blunt, restrictive subject to something that augments the modern way of working. And the challenges it brings, including the daunting aspects of M365 in general. I want to talk about the modern tools that provide real security for the Microsoft Cloud, whilst ensuring that we still collaborate and share and work in the modern ways we've become accustomed to. Also want to highlight how Microsoft 365 security has evolved into the Microsoft Defender umbrella, and talk about the underlying products. And it's all really in a hope that you're able to take away from today's session an understanding of how to implement the solutions in effective ways. So let's get cracking. What I'm going to talk about first is, you've probably seen this diagram before. It's all about how the perimeter, the security perimeter has changed from the old way of working to the modern, more hybridized way of working. So let's have a look at the old world first of all. So in the old world, we had our perimeter, which is the blue line here, the blue circle. And within that, we had our servers, we've got our data, we've got our clients, we've got users, we've got our mail architecture, we've got everything on-prem there that would makes up our organization. And then on the outside, we'd have a standard firewall to protect that perimeter from any attacks or any unauthorized access. So in a sense, just a very siloed way of kind of working. And it's always been the way that we kind of still have that today, pretty much. Now, if we look at the new world, or the way that things look now, we still have that perimeter. We still have that server architecture in a lot of organizations. We still have Exchange, we still have identities, we still have all that good stuff that I mentioned in the kind of left-hand side there. But what we also see is these items now extending outside that perimeter. So things like M365 primarily, or SaaS products, Azure, cloud services, they're all bringing these aspects into the Microsoft Cloud, or into the cloud in general. So things like servers are now, IaaS models within Azure. We've got Exchange now hybridized into Exchange Online. And we've also got things like, user synchronization as well, from on-premise Active Directory into the cloud. And that brings with it this extra dotted orange line here, which is our new perimeter. So as well as protecting everything within the blue line, we also now need to think about how we protect everything that lives outside of that, thanks to the adoption of the cloud. So let's look at some of the current challenges that brings. So first and foremost, broader attack surface. So networks are now extended to cover the new cloud architecture. Identity now exists outside of the old perimeter. And we've also got remote and home working, which brings its own challenges. Things like split tunneling, etc., for ensuring that going out to the internet for the Microsoft traffic, and not requiring to come back down the organization pipe to do that. So split tunneling has been implemented. So it's all about, you've lost that control of your direct internet access. So, making sure we put kind of layers in front of that to still protect us. And then we've got hybrid businesses are definitely more commonplace now. So Microsoft 365 services adoption brings this alone pretty much. Things like synchronized identity, so expanding your on-prem AD estate into the cloud and synchronizing data across to Azure AD. Hybrid exchange, mentioned that in the previous slide as well. And it is really, in a sense, extending your exchange org to facilitate migration to the cloud of your mailboxes, etc. And then ongoing management of your exchange estate as well. And then thirdly, we've got attacks that are becoming much more sophisticated. With that, we're seeing malware that's becoming deeply embedded in mail and attachments. Phishing emails are becoming so realistic. An example of that would be a Royal Mail delivery note to get a redelivery. It looks more and more like Royal Mail with deeply embedded malware in the links that you're clicking through. And then spoofing as well is still commonplace, even with DKIM and DMARC now being implemented. We still need to think about how we manage the kind of spoofing of existing identities. So yeah, I mean, all of this kind of expansion of the perimeter definitely brings these kind of worries to the table. Now we think about adoption of M365. Any kind of security aligned person or staff member is going to be worried about how we protect everything that's now extended and used within the M365 service or platform. So let's look at some of the ways that can be quite daunting. So expansive app suite. So if we think about it, apps for enterprise, which is what used to be Office 365 Pro Plus. Is evolving with so many applications to consume that to evolve quickly and become hard to manage. And then all of the general M365 applications themselves. I mean, this wheel is probably old now. I think there's more being added to this now, but you can see that it's all kind of circumferenced by the Office graph, etc. So you've got all this things to think about from a security standpoint, and not just from an adoption standpoint. Exchanging SharePoint Online, commonplace with thinking about data and comms communications. The explosion of Microsoft Teams and Teams' wider platform as well within organizations can cause issues with ensuring control of chats, conversations, files, etc. So lots of things to think about there with the expansive kind of application suite. And then obviously the management of data is quite paramount there. So data now has a new home with SharePoint Online, Teams data. Nearly all aspects of M365 use SharePoint Online to a certain degree. OneDrive to drive drives the functionality of sharing, etc. Stream for kind of for I suppose webinar recordings and meeting recordings, etc. So it's all these things that we need to think about, especially when we're sharing data, etc. You know, ensuring that we're sharing it in effective and efficient ways and doing it safely. And then identity, if I could click, which is becoming, or it is the most common attack surface that we see today. Everything from phishing to malware, it's all focused towards the identity, and that's where we see most breaches or attacks making their way into organizations, as well as data leaks as well, which we'll talk about later in today's session. So it's all about mitigating the worries about using the services, and the next slide just pretty much hammers home the fact that there's a number of tools at your disposal within M365 that's going to help you protect your estate as you move forward. So what we'll do is we'll look at a few of those solutions now. I mean, as I mentioned, these solutions that we'll talk about, first of all come under the Microsoft Defender banner. You'll probably recognize some of these as being, Azure ATP or Defender ATP. All of these things now become Microsoft Defender, and then they've different variants underneath that umbrella. So let's look firstly at Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Now, this is where your anti-phishing or all of your anti-rules are applied, or your policies are applied. So things like anti-phishing, anti-malware, anti-spam, giving you really deep policy configuration to control how these aspects are coming into your organization, and how you manage those threats as they enter as well, or protect from them, even affecting you at all. So it's all kind of ways that you can do that. The other element of that is the safe attachments and safe links, which are excellent. Safe attachments specifically allows you to detonate attachments in a sandbox environment prior to it being opened by the user, to ensure that there's no viruses or issues with that file or that attachment before it's then delivered to the recipient, to allow for them to consume it. Safe Links works in very much the same way, again protecting clicking on that link to ensure that it's been assessed and scanned for any issues prior to that happening. And then also with Microsoft Defender for Office 365, we have rich analytics and automation to allow for the tracking of threats, not just in your organization, but out in the Microsoft ecosystem. So we can take action to prevent them from affecting our organization with automated incident response and real-time scanning and monitoring, just as attacks unfold across the ecosystem as well. So it's great to give you a kind of education about where things are coming from, and campaign views, etc., allow you to kind of view ongoing campaigns. And generally you can have automated runbooks that you can utilize to protect yourself against that. So more advanced analytics and reporting and great kind of stuff included under the hood. When we look at the split for Defender for Office 365, everything that I mentioned at the top there is included in Plan 1. That's generally available within M365 E3, within the M365 security variant, and also within the SEP licensing package as well. Everything in Plan 2 tends to move again into more specifically the M365 security, but also looks at, or can also be applied via independent SEP licensing as well. So what I'm going to do is just going to step out the slides for 1 second, just to show you some of the configuration that you can see within specifically the safe attachments, if we can do that, just to kind of show you what you can configure in there, and probably some effective elements of it that allow you to introduce the security layer, but then not hinder the kind of modern collaborative way of working. So if I jump into threat policies here, and I will jump into safe attachments, then what we'll see, I've already got one there created, but let's just create a new one. I'm going to give it a name. No idea. Defog, that'll have to do. We'll go with defog, and we'll go next. Now, I just want to show you a couple of options you have here for the delivery mechanism. So generally, you would imagine that a safe attachments policy would restrict you on how you can present those attachments to your end users. I mean, generally by using one of the top options here, like having it on monitor only, which then delivers the attachment even if the malware is detected, but tracks the scan results, or a plain old block. It's quite restrictive to a certain degree. But one of the great new introductions here is dynamic delivery. Now, what this does is it delivers the email to the user, so that user still receives their email, but it doesn't have the attachment until it's been detonated in the sandbox environment to ensure that there's no viruses or no issues after the scan. And then that's delivered onto the message. And usually there's around a 1 to 2 minute delay in that happening. It's It's getting faster over time, but it's one of those features that allows you to implement deep kind of attachment security without hindering your end users working away. Pretty much, so it's a great kind of way of doing that. So I wanted to point that out. So what I'll do is I'll jump back into the slides. If you bear with me 1 second, I can press the right button. And let's jump straight into the next one. So Microsoft Defender for Identity. Now, Microsoft Defender for Identity is built solely for hybrid environments. What this does, this installs sensors in your on-premise Active Directory to allow you to monitor users' activity and behaviors for any suspicious activity, overall protecting identities and reducing the attack surface. Generally, Microsoft Defender for Identity brings all the great reporting, monitoring, and analytics tools, threat hunting tools that you find within Azure AD or within the Azure ecosystem, but brings that to your on-premise estate for hybrid environments. So it will scan, it will monitor your objects, any kind of, as I said, suspicious behavior. It's such a great tool to implement. One of, I suppose, the drawbacks from that is it's not readily available in M365 E3. Generally, it's an E5 product, or it can be included in a M365 security license, or potentially an SAP offering as well. So it's something that is very valuable to have there if you're going to be having a long-term AD Connect synchronization in place. Just to allow you to keep that extra ability to monitor on-prem as well as what's in the cloud. So it's a great solution. Let's move on to the next one, which is Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now, Endpoint, this is your devices. So this is Windows 10, mobile devices, etc. And this is, I suppose, an amalgamation of Defender ATP in the cloud, or Azure ATP. And it's a great functionality, a great kind of tool that we'll kind of step through just now. So it gives you the same threat and vulnerability, I can never say that word, vulnerability management, giving you the power to protect your devices and control the effect of threats across the estate. So it can be integrated and work hand in hand with the Defender for Windows 10. So works great in that regard. It also uses something called Device Score, which assesses the elements that you have configured on your endpoints, and then gives you a score based on how secure your endpoints are. And then it doesn't just leave it at that. It tells you or gives you advice around what you can do to increase your score or increase your security on your endpoints, which is such a great tool. Even when it comes to the security aspects of M365 in general, the Microsoft Secure Score is a great way of telling how kind of secure you are and what you can do to increase your security. So in all of that, it obviously reduces the attack surface, includes endpoint detection and response, utilizing the collaboration of the cloud and Defender for Windows 10, as I mentioned. Automated investigation and remediation using the same tooling as Microsoft Defender for Office 365. A very kind of mature tool set there, which has excellent functionality. And there's also the Microsoft Threat Experts, which is a new kind of managed threat hunting service provided by Microsoft. That is a team in the world of Microsoft that sends you notifications, gives you advice on things that are happening around the world, and generally they're readily available should you require any assistance. It's such a great functionality, but it's something that I suppose once you adopt and once you utilize and find a kind of place for it, you probably wish or can't kind of realize how you can manage without it. To be fair, it's one of those things. Because obviously every attack is going to be heading somewhere within the Microsoft ecosystem, and with Defender for Office 365 looking at the campaigns and everything currently ongoing, getting quick notifications from Microsoft experts is invaluable to kind of protecting yourself moving forward. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is generally an E5 product. You can get this included with variants of M365 security, variants of Windows 10 licensing, well, anything with M365 really. So there's probably a license out there that fits if you're not going just straight for E5. So it's definitely something to investigate, or come and talk to us about it. I mean, licensing is something that we've helped a lot of customers with. It's something that we know really well, and it's all about customizing it to your requirements, which is the important aspect. Now, next up is still within the Microsoft Defender umbrella here is Microsoft Cloud App Security. Now, I love Microsoft Cloud App Security. I don't know if you can see how passionate I was there when I said love, but it's such a great tool, and it's very basics. It's there just to provide the ability to monitor activity across your cloud apps. Not just the Microsoft Cloud Apps, but a catalog of third-party cloud apps too. You can register any cloud app into the solution to give you that extra layer of monitoring over the top of it. What it gives you is information like where the apps are being accessed from, how your data is being managed and shared in the app, and all using built-in policies and alerting that's already there, ready to go. You can still build your own custom policies in there as well, which is great. Another feature of MCAS is the ability to ingest your firewall logs to provide deep analytics and provide further enhanced monitoring and reporting to a certain degree, just to give you that more visibility over how your kind of your security posture is. Another element, which is one of the many arms of the Microsoft Cloud App Security product set, is Windows 10 session controls. Combining with conditional access, you have the ability to block downloads, block copy and paste, etc. So various different session controls that you can apply, not just from monitoring aspects. So as soon as you link this up to Windows Defender for Win 10, you are able to get really in-depth session information, and then from that information that you're receiving in that monitoring, that alerts, you're able to build policies out the back of that in collaboration with conditional access, etc., to allow you to kind of work better and kind of safely. You can also assign label policies and sensitivity policies, etc., to your estate via MCAS. I don't want to stress this enough. It's such a vast solution, and it's definitely valuable to have in place for as an extra security layer. Almost like a single pane of glass. There we go. I used the jargon. It means I'm done now. I need to go. Anywho, so just talk about licensing for that. So M365 E3 gives you the basic monitoring, user activity monitoring and alerts, that kind of good stuff. Allows you to see the cloud app catalog. That's one thing I failed to mention there. The cloud app catalog is a tool that allows you to see the security posture of individual third-party apps, not just the Microsoft specific ones, but other tools as well, whether they're using SSL, whether they're using any SOC products, all the kind of stuff that you need to know about a solution prior to you adopting it. So it's quite powerful, and with that you get that included in the kind of the E3 licensing. For the log ingestion, for the session controls, for security policy assignments, that generally lives within E5 or in one of the advanced M365 security or compliance licenses as well, or a combination of the licenses. So it's definitely worthwhile asking the question about how you can get the solution, because once you have this implemented well, it just works extremely well. And again, this just augments your existing security by adding extra functionality, extra services to it, rather than hindering how you're working in the estate. And then finally, just within the same sort of conversation strain, we've got conditional access. Now, I would imagine that most organizations are using conditional access to a certain degree. I say this a lot, but it's a great tool. It can control how your services are accessed and base that access on conditions to ensure that access to your resources is defined in your own terms. Let's look at some of the functionality specifically when it comes to conditional access, and then I'll maybe just step out just to show you a couple of aspects around it. So control access to cloud resources, apply conditions for access, controls based on device or user conditions, can simply be used to apply MFA, but not just apply MFA, but also the ability to share security registration information between MFA, so multi-factor authentication, and SSPR, which is self-service password reset. So instead of users having to register for both portals, they would just have to register for MFA or SSPR, and the registration information would be shared using this conditional access policy. And then, as mentioned in the previous slide, we can also configure app control policies to block downloads, block copy paste, etc., utilizing MCAS and its session controls. So let's jump out of the slides again. If I can get my mouse, and then let's just jump into Azure. Generally, it lives within Azure Active Directory, and then within the security, and then we have conditional access here. And you can see I've just got a policy there that is an app control policy that blocks downloads. Got that in report only mode, and so I'm just getting kind of feedback as to where that would apply, if it would be applied to a certain action, etc. Just before I then roll that out to my demo organization. But let's just go into new policy there, just to give you an example here. And what I want to do is just quickly show a couple of things here. So users and groups for assignment when you're creating a policy. It's important to always have a break glass account. So having a GA account that is maybe cloud only, that only has portal access, no licenses assigned to that. It's always best to have something like that excluded from the policies, so that if you ever lose access to your tenant or to your estate or your cloud apps, then you can come back and use the cloud apps, the cloud only account to get your access back in there and remove the policy, etc. It's just a great way of kind of mitigating that. So in here we can choose cloud apps or user actions. So the cloud apps are all the cloud apps that are discovered. Again, this utilizes MCAS as well. So all I can do is I can select specific apps there, or I can select all cloud apps. And again, exclude apps as well, so we can go with the all cloud apps approach, but then exclude specific ones, which is quite good. User actions, so this is where we can register security information, as I mentioned here. So applying this policy as a register security information is a great way to share that data, that registration information across. And then the conditions here. So if I pop in here, you can do permission conditions based on location. So again, that could be your public subnet. It can be a general global locale. It could be Russia. It could be China. It could be anything like that. You would define the location in the Azure portal before you would implement the location within the conditional access policy. But it's a great way of kind of managing, access from specific locations. And then client apps, so in there you can detect whether it's mobile device apps, whether it's client apps, whether it's web apps, so whether it's using the web, etc. And then you've got device state there as well. So again, just using your compliance options within your device management to apply the kind of policies depending on what state that's in, whether it's not compliant or things like that. And then we've got the option to apply the actions or the controls, and generally it's a grant or a block. But what we can do from here is we can grant but require additional elements. So this is where we would apply MFA to the organization, is we would grant access, but we would require MFA. We could also, if the device is managed within Azure AD or within Intune, they may require the device to be marked as compliant prior to that user being allowed in. And then a few other options there that I won't go too much into. But yeah, just the ability there to report only, get deep auditing of the rule first, before then applying it to the organization to ensure that, again, you're seamlessly introducing these solutions to secure yourselves, but not to hinder how people are working within the organization. So let's pop back into the slides. Let me just pop my slides back up. Just step through conditional access. One of the great things about conditional access is the only requirement there is Azure AD Premium P2, which can be purchased as a standalone product, or it can be included in things like EMS E5, E5 license, sometimes in the Microsoft security offering, or a modified SCP package, or a framework offering as well. So let's step into the next slide. So privileged identity management is something that I find every organization that is homed in the Microsoft cloud should adopt. It's such a powerful solution that allows you to manage your Azure and Azure AD roles. So instead of having Joe Bloggs in IT that has global administrator assigned to him, he is a global administrator. He always has access to that. So, you know, there's a risk there because that person doesn't require that access all the time. So what PIM does is it allows you to assign the roles to individual users to allow for you to kind of manage, or them to request and seek approval for enabling that role for activity. And generally we'll assign that for a specific amount of time, where they'll have enough time to do whatever action they have. I mean, you can permanently assign these to groups or individual users, so that they can request access to that, you know, whenever they require it. And it's such a seamless way of doing it as well. Even the approvals is all managed via the kind of PIM portal. It's just such a good way to ensure that, you know, you're only using the administrative roles when you need to use them. So it's definitely a valuable solution. And again, just like conditional access, that's generally included within Azure AD Premium P2. So we've talked about the different Microsoft Defender solutions, but let's look at data, because data is really important. You know, the security products provide surefast perimeter around the common attack surfaces, but the data is in your hybrid estate, in your cloud, is still there. It still needs to be controlled. It still needs to be managed. So how do we kind of look at that? I mean, so let's first of all look at the data lifecycle. So if we think about it, we've got our user here on the left-hand side, and what do our users do? They create data. So this is Joe Bloggs and his pal there. They're creating some data. It's all been created, Word documents, text emails, etc. They've all created the data. You know, things like apps for enterprise be used to create that data, or maybe it lives in SharePoint Online, etc. And then the next step of that is that the data moves. So data moves, it can be anywhere, it could be a third-party service, could be talked about within a Teams chat, could be shared by email, could be uploaded into SharePoint Online from a OneDrive. You know, the data will move. That's generally the kind of life cycle of data. Once it's created, it generally moves around. But the more worrying aspect is the data that leaves your company, because ultimately data will leave your company, whether it's through printing, email, sharing, etc. So it's important to kind of to know your data, protect and govern your data, and especially sensitive data, and then ultimately prevent data loss. So, I mean, that's what we'll discuss kind of in a slide in a moment. It's all about protecting your data that's sent outside of the organization, you know, or shared, or even marking or labeling your data as it kind of goes through the life cycle. So what about the M365 data? Where I mean, where does the majority of our data live? So the majority of the data lives within SharePoint Online. Teams file data is homed in SharePoint Online. Data can even be shared with SharePoint Teams or OneDrive. OneDrive generally used for personal shared data. If you share a file, more often than not, it resides within OneDrive and is shared from there. There's also data in Outlook, so anything from received attachments that are never shared, or the communications themselves, even that may contain specifically sensitive information. And of course, Teams, which is all kind of second nature to us now. So here we talk about data, we share data, we provide access to guests to come in and consume our data. So there's various ways that the data is managed there. So our data is everywhere. And how do we protect and govern the data over and above what we have already discussed today? And I suppose where that starts is labeling your data and knowing where your sensitive data is pretty much the first step of that. And one of the elements that we'll discuss quickly is data classifications, primarily. The Compliance Centre is the home for information protection and governance, with some great tools out there to provide excellent controls and manage options for data. So when we look at labeling, it's all about marking the data to know what's included in that data. Is it sensitive? Is it confidential? Does it contain sensitive data? If it does, what label do we apply to that to mark it clearly? And not just kind of file data, but also the exchange data. So emails that are leaving the organization, does it contain sensitive information? If it does, then what we'll do is we'll apply a label to that, just to ensure that we're applying the right controls over it. People that access that know what sort of information is included in there. And then what we can also do is apply actions off the back of that. So we can, encrypt something that's maybe too sensitive. We can even plainly block things. Should it be too sensitive to leave the organization? And the way that works is by having individual sensitive information within your tenant, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But again, this policies can be applied to files, to emails, to chats, to everything within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. In a further session that we'll have as part of this series, we'll talk more in depth about data classifications, labeling, retention, etc., which is such an important topic. And again, all of the kind of standard labeling is included in E3. All the automation and unified, so on-prem and hybridized data, is where we start looking at E5 or one of the more custom security packages. Data loss prevention is the last thing on the agenda today. Data loss prevention is great because it goes hand in hand with the protection of sensitive data that we have just discussed. It looks at the data that's being shared externally or internally. It doesn't matter where it's headed. Checks to see whether the sensitive information is contained in that. If it is, it can apply actions based on the back of that. Or it can just report that back to the organisation so that you can plan out an education piece around it. There's 30 plus custom sensitive information types in there currently, things like UK passport numbers, bank details, credit card numbers, birthdays, various kind of element ones already in there. But the great thing is that you can create your own custom PII using regular expression. So if it follows a particular pattern, you can use regex to define that pattern. And then again, it will give you that ability to scan the emails or not just the emails, but the data for that custom PII. If that's found, then it will apply the actions that you define as part of the policy. Again, something that we'll go into more in depth in a later session because it's such an important factor. And again, M365E3 gives you the data loss prevention functionality. Data loss prevention is readily available across most licenses because it's such a fundamental tool for organizations today. So hopefully you've managed to glean some good information from today's session and can see that using the right tool for the right scenario is the key to success. But it all comes from understanding what is available and understanding how we can implement the great security products and layers that really protect us from today's attacks, but without impacting the modern agile way of working. This can also mean understanding what you have included in your licensing. So, as I mentioned earlier on, understanding what you have in your licensing will allow you to understand which products that you can utilize. And that's something that we're always ready to help organizations with. Hopefully from today's section, you've seen that we're passionate about this technology, and we're keen to kind of get involved and kind of, get involved with you and help you on your journey. Whether that's adoption, strategy, planning for these tools, etc. So it's definitely all about knowing what's available and kind of how to kind of utilize that. But that's my session for today. Thank you very much for staying on and listening to me ramble on about stuff that I'm very much passionate about. What I'll do now is I'll hand it back to Taras.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dave. That's really good. Before we look at any questions that have come in, I'd just like to thank you all for attending our event this morning. We're really keen to carry on the conversation around Microsoft 365 security with all of you. I appreciate we have a mix today of existing CompanyNet customers and people that perhaps we haven't worked with before. And that every organization's at different points in your Microsoft 365 journey. So either way, we have the means to help you on the security front. And I hope you've taken that away from what Dave's been talking about today. So whether that's just giving you some advice and insight or going as far as augmenting your team or anything in between, CompanyNet can help you there. So as I say, we're very keen to pick up with each of you to see how we can help provide something that's tailored to your organization's requirements. On that front, watch out for a follow-up email from us after this event. Of course, that's going to have the inevitable feedback survey, which I'd really encourage you all to fill out as we're still developing this Get It Sorted webinar series. Your input would really help us get it right in future. And of course, we'll be sharing a recording of this session with you all too. And I know we're all looking forward to taking the conversation forward from there. So now that said, let's have a look at any questions that have come in. So we have a question in from Sarah. Sarah says, our organization is really interested in implementing more in-depth security around data labeling. Seems like a great place to start. Oh, sorry, labeling seems like a great place to start. Would you tend to recommend a phased introduction to labels or go straight to applying actions like encryption? Well, I'll let Dave answer that because that's definitely his domain.
Champing at the bit to come in. But just to kind of say that labeling is such a great, powerful solution, but it's also an education for your organization because it's a change in the way that you mark and apply the labels to your data. So you need to educate your users about how the labels are structured, what each label means, and how to select the right label for the right scenario. Auto labeling will help you out at a certain degree, but we always find that in a report only functionality, you're able to still report on the kind of label creation and the kind of the use of the labels, but then you're able to kind of drive that education before you then start implementing the kind of the mandatory label configurations. So definitely start with the education before then beginning to kind of to get involved with applying and kind of mandatory requiring the labels. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thanks. One more question here from Thomas. He says, you mentioned about subject access requests within Microsoft 365. Is this something that's easy and automated?
Okay, so subject access requests are great. They're in the compliance center, and generally what they do is they make your life easier when it comes to DSARs within the Microsoft 365 cloud environment, because you can create a case. You can use eDiscovery to gather all the data that mentions the subject. and then it compiles that into our reports. You can download that, you can share it, you can do whatever you need to do to that data prior to then sharing it with the requester. So it's a great tool. I know I've just quickly touched on it earlier on in the session, but it's something that I think values or warrants a more deeper conversation in a further webinar. So yeah, hopefully that helps.